and so forth. First time I ever heard of Gerry Condon was in Vancouver in 1972. And the word was, Gerry Condon's here. And he was a well-known Vietnam War resister, organizing Americans living in Canada and opposing the Vietnam War. And I didn't know him then. I was aware of what he was doing, of all the good work he was doing. He was writing excellent articles in Common Dreams and other publications, online publications. And then we started connecting and doing some work together around Central America. And then I became aware of, I was invited to join Veterans for Peace as an associate member. And I was very happy and proud to do that. And Gerry was one of the recipients when the Mount Diablo Peace and Justice Center awarded its award last year to the peace fighters or peace warriors, or what did we call it? Anyway, last year they were the Veterans for Peace. One was recognized for all their good work. And I'm going to turn it over to Gerry in just a minute here, but before that, just a couple of days ago, we had a visitor from the Center for Citizen Initiatives, which is a very good group that's been doing people-to-people exchanges with Russia beginning in the 1980s. And I talked to the new president of that group, Paula Day, and she happened to see on my fridge the poster for today's event. And she said, Gerry Condon, is he going to be here? So Gerry's name gets around. He kind of works more behind the scenes. He's an excellent organizer and a tremendous force for the progressive community in the U.S. So we're really happy to have him here today. He drove all the way down from Clear Lake to be with us today. So let's have a warm round of applause for Gerry Condon.
A little bit more? Okay. I have to talk right into it then.
Yes.
Okay. That's good. Well, great to see you all here today. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm really surprised to see such a big crowd. Rick promised me there was only going to be 2 or 3 folks. So, and thanks to Rick for inviting me and for doing all the public relations. As you can see, he's my PR guy. Kind of inflates my ego a bit temporarily. I don't really see myself as a leading light in the peace and justice movement, but I have been at it for a while, and I've had the opportunity to participate in a lot of interesting and historical events, really. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey today, and then bring it back around to what's going on today in the peace movement and what's. I'm a board member of Veterans for Peace. We have quite a bit going on right now that I want to share with you. So I'm a Bay Area boy. I grew up in San Mateo, born at Mills Hospital. I went to Catholic schools, St. Matthew's Catholic Schools, Sarah High. Actually had a couple of years in St. Anthony's Franciscan Seminary in Santa Barbara. Went to the University of San Francisco. Come from an Irish Catholic family. My father and both his brothers fought in World War II. And after the war, they moved, the whole extended family moved from Chicago to San Mateo. And the 3 boys joined the San Mateo police force. So I grew up on a steady diet of course, patriotism and anti-communism. It was pretty hard to escape, So I should have been all primed to go off and fight the communists in their faraway lands. But actually I had some serious doubts about war in general and about the Vietnam War in particular when it came around. And I think that there's a lot of people here about my age probably, so I think just about any U.S. male who was draft age during the Vietnam War has some stories to tell about the difficult decisions they had to make at that time and how it changed many of our lives. So that's certainly true for me. I actually wrote a letter to my draft board telling them I had serious doubts about the war. I thought I might be a conscientious objector. I didn't want to kill. And kind of wrote a long, passionate letter. And what I got back was an envelope with about 2 inches, seemed about an inch or two of paperwork in there that they wanted me to fill out, answering specific questions about my religious upbringing at a time that I was starting to question that as well. And so I ended up throwing that whole package in the garbage. And I was going to the University of San Francisco, but I dropped out for a semester to work, and therefore I lost my draft deferment, my student deferment from the draft. And I knew that my number was going to be coming up soon. Not literally, because they didn't have the lottery in the system yet, but I knew I would be drafted soon. And I ended up enlisting, kind of jumping before I pushed, or before I was pushed. And a buddy of mine enlisted in the buddy system together. And next thing I knew, I was doing basic training at Fort Ord. And it was a pretty jarring experience. It's kind of a brutal training. And next thing I knew, I found myself running around with a rifle in formation, yelling, "Kill the gooks, kill the gooks." And I said, oh my God, what have I got myself into here? But I kept on pushing myself. I didn't really didn't really have much information about the war. Even though I had gone to University of San Francisco, lived in Haight-Ashbury for a while, during some wild times in the mid-60s. Didn't really learn much about the war and what it was all about. I didn't really trust the student demonstrators, who were, of course, being red-baited. But I didn't trust the politicians either. And so I kind of had the feeling I had to go find out for myself. So I actually, not only did I enlist in the Army, but I ended up getting recruited into Army Special Forces, or Green Berets, and trained as a Green Beret medic. And when my friends started coming back from the Vietnam War, recent veterans telling me stories of the atrocities that they had witnessed or sometimes even participated in, I was shocked. That was kind of the last straw for me. Some of them were very, very upset by what they had seen or done. Some of them were bragging about it, but they were both telling the same story. So I said, that's it. So I began to speak out against the war. I actually managed to get myself a leave from Fort Bragg, where I was training, and came back to San Mateo. And I went to the New San Mateo Times and the San Francisco Chronicle with a statement about why I was opposed to the draft, opposed to the war, opposed to the limited criteria for conscientious objector status, etc., etc. Another passionate letter, which was printed in full. I was surprised, in the San Mateo Times. And then the Chronicle had a front page article that said, "Anti-war Green Beret drops out," and there's my picture, wearing a Green Beret. Which was pretty shocking, because my decision at the time was I was going to make this public statement, and then I was going to go back to Fort Bragg and just surrender and go to prison for a while. That was going to be my form of resistance. I didn't know of any other. I was a good Catholic martyr. Scary time at Travis Air Force Base. I had to get on a plane to go back to Fort Bragg, and I was on military transport. So I catch a plane from Travis Air Force Base to Charleston, South Carolina, and then get from there to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So I was it was early morning. It was like 6 in the morning. It was dark. I was in a line to get on the plane, and wearing my uniform. And I saw this commotion happening up in the front of the line. I said, what the heck's going on up there? And then I could see, oh, there's 3 Special Forces Green Beret sergeants. You know, because I was just really still in training, but they were the real deal. And they had the San Francisco Chronicle with me articles about the anti-war Green Beret dropping out, and with my picture in it. And they were really furious. They were just cussing it. And I said, oh my God. That was probably the scariest moment in my whole adventure. So I kind of reached up really slowly, my left hand up to my chest, pulled my name tag off, shoved it in my pocket, and off I went. So they didn't figure out who I was, thank God. So, but I did get myself back to Fort Bragg, and then I began to refuse all orders, and I was, they encouraged me to apply for conscientious objector discharge, which I did, but then I was turned down and ordered to Vietnam. I was actually given 2 separate orders to deploy to Vietnam, refused them both, and was charged with 2 counts of refusing orders. And was court-martialed, and eventually actually sentenced to 10 years in prison. But don't worry, I never did any of that time. I actually was able to, at that point, I kind of saw the writing on the wall. My court-martial board was made up of a colonel and 2 majors and several captains, and they all had Vietnam patches on and airborne patches, and it was a hanging jury. And the word was out that they were going to make an example out of me. So finally, at the last minute, I decided to, before I was actually confined, I decided to split. And so I walked off Fort Bragg, stuck my thumb out, hitchhiked to New York City, phoned my mom, said, send me my passport, please. No, not my passport, but my birth certificate, so I could apply for a passport in New York City, which I did. And I got the passport and I headed for Canada. And so I ended up going to Montreal and then on to Europe, traveled around Europe for a little while, and then ended up in Sweden. Sweden was the only country actually in the world that gave asylum to Vietnam deserters and draft resistors because they were deserters and draft resistors. There was a big anti-war movement in Sweden, so it was a very popular move for the government to grant asylum to us. So I was in Sweden for 3 years. I worked with a group called the American Deserters Committee, and we were very involved with opposing the war and working together with the Swedish anti-war movement and the European anti-war movement. And I was there for 3 years, and then I came back to Canada, and where I was for another 3 years working with anti-war veterans and deserters and draft resistors in Vancouver, as well as to Toronto. I came back to the U.S. in 1975 as part of a campaign for amnesty for all war resistors. We were pressing not only for an end to the war in Vietnam, but for all charges to be dropped and all punishment we called it to be dropped from people who had resisted the war. Our slogan was, it's right to resist an unjust war. So we had quite an interesting amnesty. So I was able to come back. I was actually I still had a jail sentence hanging over my head when I returned. And I was actually refusing to participate. I publicly refused to participate in President Ford's very limited clemency program, which he called the Earned Reentry Program. There was quite a substantial amnesty movement at the time. It was a very popular demand among grassroots Democrats, and there was a lot of support for amnesty, especially for draft resistors, who tended to be more middle class and had a little bit more, their families had a little more political clout than the deserters, who tended to be more working class. And at any rate, the government, I went on a 50-city speaking tour that was organized by this big coalition, the ACLU, the churches, National Council of Churches, Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and other groups organized the tour. And at the end of that tour, after 50 cities in 5 months, the government quietly dropped my jail sentence and sent me a bad conduct discharge in the mail. So I never did a single day in prison, but as I sometimes like to say, jokingly, I've been a prisoner of the peace movement ever since. I continued to work for Amnesty for All War Resistors. We had quite an amazing experience at the 1976 Democratic Party convention in New York City, the one that was Jimmy Carter's convention. We had a campaign for amnesty right within the convention. We had a lot of support from the mainstream Democrats, and of course, Jimmy Carter himself was running on a platform of pardoning draft resistors. So we managed to get a draft resistor who was living in London. Fritz Efaw was his name. He got himself elected as an alternate delegate from Democrats abroad. And then we negotiated with the government to allow him to attend the Democratic Convention before they arrested him. And they agreed to do that, surprisingly. So then once he got to the convention, we found out that, we got him nominated to be the vice president. It was pretty easy to do, actually. You could just get like 100 signatures, I think it was something like 100 signatures out of 2,300 delegates to get it. I think they've changed that rule since. But we got him nominated to be vice president. So there were 4 nominees. Ron Dellums was one of them, and we coordinated with the Dellums campaign. And there was a right to life, anti-abortion candidate. There was Fritz Mondale, who eventually was, of course, elected to vice president. And there was our guy, Fritz Efaw. And we all got equal time. And we drew straws for the best prime time spot. And we won that spot. So we had 15 minutes of prime time television with over 60 million viewers. Fritz Efaw was nominated by Louise Ransom, who was the Gold Star mother. Her son had been killed in Vietnam. And the seconding speech was given by Ron Kovic, a Vietnam veteran who's been paralyzed from the chest down ever since he was shot in Vietnam, and he's a leading anti-war activist. Have any of you seen the movie Born on the 4th of July?
Yes.
And that's based on the book that Ron wrote. And that movie is more faithful to a book than any I've ever seen. It was really, really well done. But Ron gave what many people said was the most powerful speech of the convention. So that was quite a victory on our part, and of course Carter did go on to get elected. The first thing he did, his very first act as president, was to pardon draft resistors. And then he made some accommodations for deserters and others to come back on a case-by-case basis. So that allowed a lot of people to come back, because between 60 and 100,000 had gone to Canada. And 30,000 of them are there today, still, as Canadian citizens. And they're involved in every aspect of Canadian life, you could imagine. They're getting to be retirement age now. And there were fewer of us in Sweden, about 800 total over the years. And we also had people in England and in France and other places. A lot of those people were found they were making a really good life in those countries, and that, you know, they were living the American dream in Canada. They didn't necessarily want to come back, but they were able to come back to get their status legalized, and then go back to Canada or France, and then be able to, you know, visit their families and without having to worry about getting arrested. So that was all good. So after the amnesty campaign kind of died down, many of us who were involved in that campaign got involved in what we call counter-recruitment work. So there's a lot of Vietnam veterans were part of that, going into the high schools and the schools and even the middle schools, and to talk to the young children who otherwise were getting this really slanted sales pitch from military recruiters. And so a lot of veterans were involved in those efforts. And I ended up working as the national coordinator of the Committee Against Registration and the Draft in Washington, D.C. And a lot of veterans were in that network. So in 1983, the August of '83, I believe it was, the Veterans of Foreign Wars had their convention in New Orleans, and they invited Ronald Reagan to be their guest speaker, and he was president at the time, I believe. And they publicly pledged that they were going to raise $1 million to send to the Contras in Nicaragua, the counter-revolutionary forces that had been organized by the CIA to fight against the Sandinista government, which had succeeded in overthrowing the dictator Somoza. So it's a long story, but at any rate, my phone started ringing off the hook. A lot of angry Vietnam veterans saying, hey, these guys don't speak for us. We have to do something. We don't want to see another Vietnam War in Central America. And so we decided to do something, and we organized a delegation right away, within a couple months, to a delegation of veterans to Nicaragua. And then we organized another delegation to Nicaragua the following year. In both cases, we toured all around the country, including going into the war zones of Nicaragua, seeing what was happening with the war, and came back even more committed to telling the truth about what's going on in Nicaragua and trying to stop that war, which eventually did happen, but it's a long, twisted story. And we then launched a number of other efforts and one of them was called the Veterans Peace Action Teams, which was U.S. veterans going into the war zones of Nicaragua and actually rebuilding schools and schools and churches, not schools and churches, schools and clinics that had been destroyed by the Contras. That was a very powerful effort, and that was an initiative initiated by Brian Willson. Some of you probably know about Brian. Actually, we have a clip here. We're going to show in a second an interview that we recently conducted with Brian Willson, where he can tell you a little bit about himself and what moved him. And then I'll take advantage of the opportunity for a bathroom break, and I'll be right back.
powerful transformation of sometimes gung-ho GIs to committed peace activists is personified by two of the most prominent Vietnam veterans, both of whom were coincidentally born on the 4th of July. One of them, Ron Kovic, who was paralyzed from the chest down due to wounds he suffered in Vietnam, and who was thrown out of his wheelchair by Los Angeles police when leading an anti-war demonstration, wrote a great book about his experience, Born on the 4th of July, which was made into a great movie by Oliver Stone. The other prominent Vietnam veteran activist, Brian Willson, lost both legs in September 1987 when he was run over by a munitions train at Concord Naval Weapons Depot, which was sending arms to U.S.-backed right-wing forces and death squads in El Salvador and Nicaragua. Brian has written a profound accounting of his experiences in his book, Blood on the Tracks. Brian is an inspiring leader who was the impetus for the Veterans Peace Walk, the Veterans Fast for Life, the Veterans Peace Action Teams, and so much more. Brian now lives in Nicaragua, where he's widely acclaimed as a national hero, and he has been awarded Nicaraguan citizenship. We are fortunate to have Brian Willson with us today. Welcome, Brian. It's nice to have you with us via Zoom all the way from your home in Managua, Nicaragua. Would you like to start, Brian, by telling us a little bit about who you were before you went to Vietnam and how you were changed by your experiences in the war?
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in upstate New York in the 50s and 60s. Kind of a normal, typical Cold War atmosphere, lower working class, played sports normally, and I grew up in a little town that I really loved. It was, we had everything we needed there in terms of food, and we even had a blacksmith. But my family was very right-wing, very religious, and of course I became a regular churchgoer because of that. But I had an older brother, my only sibling, who had gone to a teacher's college in upstate New York, where he had two Marxist professors that really jolted his political consciousness about class struggle. So he helped me, his little brother, navigate through, breaking through the religious brainwashing, and then I went on to college, and I went to law school, and I was in law school. My fourth semester is when I was drafted. I had tried to enlist in 1964, and I was turned down because of high arches in my feet. It's called pes cavus. But in 1966, when Johnson increased his draft call, they had to go to the school deferment, and I was one who was drafted. And then before I had to report, I enlisted in the Air Force. I didn't want to go in the Army or the Marines. I wasn't particularly interested in being in the military, but I was just navigating, without any political consciousness. I was navigating my life as easy as it could be. I was trying to avoid combat and so forth. So I did 4 years in the Air Force. I was in the bayonet training at Fort Campbell. I still have any real politics, but I refused to do the bayonet training just because it seemed so repulsive to me. It really wasn't a political act. It was a personal act of repulsion in my mind.
A lot of GIs balked at that bayonet training. It was too up close and personal, I guess. Yep. Kill.
And you shouted it 100 times.
Right.
Kill 100 times. So I got in trouble for that. I had to see the squadron commander, then I had to see the wing commander, then I had to see a psychiatrist. It was all pretty ridiculous, but I wound up going with my unit on March 8th, 1969, and in my first 6 weeks, I started really having a pretty turbulent emotional and intellectual challenge as to how I was going to deal with all the changes that were going on in my mind and in my heart. And I was given a special assignment just for 1 week. It wasn't even my job, but I agreed to do it, which was assessing the success or not of bombing missions. And bombing missions were daytime, and I had a Vietnamese officer that attended with me, and we would do 5 villages in April of 1969. And that's where my life completely changed. Every village, every target, I didn't even think about targeting a village, but of course in Vietnam, everybody was a target, and they were all, we considered them dead Vietnamese, good Vietnamese. And so the very first village we went into, I remember it was April 14th, 1969. And I was shocked what I viewed. It was bedlam. Virtually everybody had been killed in the napalm bombing. There was a water buffalo over as we got close to the village. There was a water buffalo lying on its side with a big gash in its belly and a third of its skull gone. I threw up when I saw that, and then immediately I saw all these bodies on the ground, and one woman in particular who was holding her children when the bombs came. Her eyelids had been burned off, and I was looking at her eyes, and I was struck by the fact that I was looking at a woman who, to me, at some psychic level, was my sister or my mother. And I've never gotten over that. In fact, I give them their name, Miley, because I think of her all the time. And the Vietnamese officer would laugh as I was crying. So at that point, I guess you'd say it might have been like an LSD trip. I haven't had an LSD trip. I'm one of the few of my generation that haven't. But when I discussed this with my therapist later on, when I got out of the military, they said, well, that was like an LSD trip when you saw that woman's eyes, and immediately realized that everybody's connected in the earth. Everybody's connected. As Martin Luther King used to say, an injury anywhere, an injury anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so from that point on, I was the first lieutenant, and I carried out all my duties. I was the night security commander of an air base, and I spoke out against the war every day after that. That was my only resistance. I was just being obnoxious with the NCOs and the officers. But I every day spoke out about the unconscionable nature of the war, the criminality of the war, and I guess that's why they sent me home early. They sent me home after 5 months, and I was glad. I was happy to leave. And I did 1 more year in the military in Louisiana, and then I was out. And went back to law school, finished, passed the bar exam in D.C., and first time I went into a courtroom after that, I looked at the flag up by the judge, and I couldn't look at the flag. I just couldn't look at it. It had been a symbol to me as a child during the McCarthy era, as a signal of freedom and justice. And then when I saw it, when I walked in the courtroom in 1972, it was like a swastika to me. I could not look at that flag without having really visceral reaction in my body. And I walked out and I never went back. I never practiced law. At any rate, yeah, my life was totally changed by being in Vietnam, and even at Fort Campbell before I went to Vietnam. And you know, just the journey just continued. It continued and still continues.
And please go ahead.
Thank you. Tupper Linke here. I just want to ask Brian Willson a question, and I want to thank Gerry Condon and Brian for this fine talk they've given with all this history and current information about Nicaragua and the history of Vietnam. I just wondered, and you said in answer to somebody, we need to have a deeper conversation. And that phrase stuck in my mind, and today, you know, as my wife and I are working towards ending imperialism and militarism and the genocide in Gaza, can you say a couple of things about what the deeper conversation is that we should be having with ourselves and our friends and our relatives and with the people we're communicating with and our representative or senators? What is the deeper conversation?
Well, I can give a stab at it. I think the current political economy of the United States is irredeemable and unreformable. I don't think we can get too far in terms of progress utilizing the party system or the history of elections in the United States. I think that the culture has never, ever dealt with the shame of how it originated. The shame of two genocides, Holocaust, if you will, against the Native Americans and against Africans. Our ancestors committed those actions with complete impunity. Shame is a very important evolutionary factor in human development, because you have to look at yourself and say, gee, maybe I have it wrong. It's different than guilt. You have to, like for example, myself in Vietnam, I realized I was living with a fake identity. A white male was superior. Well, I think until we address the Holocaust that originated in the Western culture in the United States, we haven't learned the deep lessons of you can't keep doing it this way. You can't keep doing it this way. And I know that shame is a very difficult thing to deal with. I've had to deal with it myself because of my role in Vietnam. But I think the United States has had impunity since 1607. Everything is done because we white Europeans are superior to, we think, to indigenous Africans, indigenous Americans. And when you have to deal with the fact that you have had a fallacious idea about how reality is, you mature, you develop a deeper moral compass, you really do understand that other people are as valuable as you are, and that justice has to be truly blind, which is not in our society. We are a racist, classist, sexist society. And if we were really going to be revolutionary, we would talk about getting rid of wage slavery and beginning a socialist revolution. At least sowing the seed for it. The Democrats don't do it. And yet I think that that's what is available to us right now at this critical time where the society is collapsing. They have a 14-year-old president. And it's going to collapse. Economically, it's going to collapse. So it's an opportune time for people to start questioning. Do we really want to just have another party, even to revive the Democratic Party? And I think the deeper question is, you have to deal with the shame of our origins. And that by doing that, we will be revolutionized.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that answer. That's just terrific. I'm going to pass on to the next questioner, but I forgot to mention I also liked your response to Ken Burns' movie about Vietnam. That was a very well-written response, and I've used that with my right-wing relatives. And thank you for that. And I'll turn the floor over to the next questioner. Thank you again for your answer there, Brian. So good to see you today.
So give Brian an applause. Brian is a good friend. I've known him for many years, done a lot of things together. I was actually with him that day out of Concord at the Naval Weapons Station there when he got run over by the train. And it's amazing that he survived that, but he did, and he's been going strong ever since. He now actually lives in, I think I mentioned it at the beginning of the, when I introduced him in the film here, but he now lives in Nicaragua. He's been given Nicaraguan citizenship. He's considered a big hero there. He has been for years, actually. Back, of course, it was 1987 when he got run over by the train. Over the next couple of years, there were a lot of Nicaraguan babies got named Brian. They're still running around today, but they're a few decades older. Yeah, so we continued to, I guess, escalate our work as veterans to try to stop the war in Nicaragua. And with a number of things, we had a number of delegations that continued to go down right into the war zone. I went up with one group of about 19 U.S. veterans into the war zone near the border with Honduras. While we were there, there was supposed to be a ceasefire that had been negotiated between the Contras and the Sandinistas with the Reagan administration backing it up. But the war was going full steam. We could hear gunfire all around us. We saw the dead and wounded soldiers being brought into the town. We visited some of the wounded soldiers in the hospital the next day. And boy, the veterans were so angry, so upset. I said, what more can we do? So they came up with a crazy idea. Let's organize a caravan, a convoy of aid and bring it to Nicaragua. So it came back to the States, and that idea percolated for a while. And sure enough, we ended up organizing something called the Veterans Peace Convoy to Nicaragua. And we had people coming from all over the United States. There were actually two major convoys that came together in Texas, Laredo, Texas. We had 39 trucks full of aid. Mostly little Toyota trucks, but some big Mercedes trucks too. And our slogan was "Feed the children, not the war." And we were all excited to be going to Nicaragua, but we were stopped in Laredo, Texas, by the U.S. government, by the Reagan administration, and in particular by one of our arch enemies, Elliot Abrams, who was the Undersecretary for Latin America at the time. He's still around, causing a little trouble when he can. And so that was probably, I think, the first humanitarian aid caravan that had ever been stopped from leaving the United States. So we had quite a struggle. We decided to go to Washington, D.C. We turned our trucks around, drove all the way to Washington, D.C., circled the White House for a while, went and talked to our Congress people. Didn't get a very good response there. Then we drove all the way back down to Laredo, Texas, and lined our trucks up right at the border, actually kind of blocked the bridge border crossing. Had all our trucks lined up, had the windows rolled up and the doors locked, and we got hit by SWAT teams who smashed the windows, maced people in the face, pulled them out of the trucks, beat them up, and then arrested them and charged them with resisting arrest, assaulting an officer, etc., etc. So that was quite something. And then we went into court, went into federal court there to get an injunction against the government stopping us from leaving the country with humanitarian aid. And when we went into court that morning, we announced that, oh, well, you know what? We actually got all our trucks on the other side of the border. And we did it by hook and by crook in various different ways. Managed to get our trucks on the other side of the border. In some cases, the border guards just looking the other way. So we had an amazing voyage driving this convoy through Mexico, through Guatemala, El Salvador. In the U.S., there was virtually a news blackout. I bet none of you heard about it. No. But it was big news all throughout Latin America. People couldn't believe that U.S. veterans would, put up with so much abuse to show solidarity with the people of Nicaragua. So we had really events and celebrations all throughout Mexico. And even when we're driving like on little dirt roads through the countryside, Guatemala, El Salvador, there were peasants out on the side of the road applauding us. And when we arrived in Nicaragua, we were greeted by 10,000 people. And then there was support all the way along the way. So, big deal in Nicaragua, big deal in Latin America, and barely a peep about it here in the United States. There's a few little news articles, but that was about it. So, we continue our solidarity with Nicaragua. Veterans for Peace, which just actually formed in the mid-'80s, in large part due to concern about what was going on in Central America. The U.S. backed war in El Salvador and the U.S. Contra war in Nicaragua. So Veterans for Peace came into being, and we've had several delegations to Nicaragua, including just a couple months ago in March. I was able to, we were able to visit Brian Willson and a lot of other people, and went down with a group of veterans, most of whom hadn't been to Nicaragua before, and really had their eyes opened, because it's a wonderful country, really warm, friendly people, a wonderful, rich culture, and government that you never know from reading the U.S. newspapers, but a government that's actually very popular because it prioritizes the needs of the poor. And they've made incredible progress in terms of lifting people out of poverty. And they're building schools and hospitals all over the country. They have reached 90% sustainable in their own agriculture. And they're doing a lot of amazing things. And one of the most amazing and remarkable things, actually, considering Latin America and all, and its storied macho culture, they have a huge priority on gender equality. And it's actually in the law now that every party who submits their candidates, half of the candidates have to be women. Wow. And then in all of the ministries now, you have a minister and a co-minister or a vice minister, and if the minister is a man, then the vice minister or the co-minister will be a woman, and vice versa. There's actually more women in the National Assembly and in cabinet positions than there are men. And so it's not a token effort. It's deep throughout the entire society They're really, they've actually been ranked 6th in the world in gender equality, and I think 1st in the Western Hemisphere. So, yeah, we have a lot to learn from Nicaragua, and yet our government continues to impose economic sanctions against Nicaragua, to lie about them to the public, and to try to punish them in various international fora, and as it does with Cuba and Venezuela, the 2 other Latin American countries that have kind of broken from the imperial yoke and are kind of forging their own economic path, which towards socialism with mixed economies. Yeah, that's just to bring it around. I mean, when I told the story earlier about deserting from the army and going to Sweden. Well, when I went there, I thought, well, something's really wrong with this war, but I didn't know what it was. But I learned a lot when I was in Sweden. I learned a lot from the Swedish anti-war movement. And I was kind of shocked at first, and I think a lot of us were shocked to learn that the country we thought was the beacon of democracy in the world was in fact lying to us and lying to the American people about the nature of the war. And that was happening in too many places around the globe. And sad to say, despite all we learned and all we went through during the Vietnam years and since, it looks like we're still stuck in a place where the U.S. government is intervening in many places around the world, oftentimes in the service of billionaires, which is becoming more obvious now, lying to the American public about it. We have too many wars going on, including the war in Ukraine, which President Trump says he wants to end, but doesn't seem to know how to do it. That war, no matter what you think about how it came to be, and certainly a large part of the story is that the U.S. and NATO were insisting on placing hostile NATO troops and even nuclear weapons right on Russia's borders. And they knew that was unacceptable to Russia. They went ahead and did it anyway, knowing that Russia might do what Russia did, invade Ukraine. So, some people say Russia had no choice. Other people say, well, there were other choices. They maybe could have found another way than to go to war. And that war now continues. It's kind of out of control. It's in danger of escalating. But it's clear, like, no matter what you think about Russia, we've all been inundated with anti-Russia propaganda all our lives. It's kind of hard to escape that. And no matter what you think about how this war began, I think we can all agree that it needs to end. The sooner the better. And what's actually happening right now is going in the opposite direction, because it seems like Trump's efforts are failing, and short-sighted and not realistic at all. And the European leaders seem to be thirsty for more war, and want to continue to have Russia as their enemy, even as they build up all of their militaries. So we're looking towards, if the trajectory isn't stopped, we're going towards another world war, another European-wide war, and possibly a nuclear war. The same goes for if the U.S. And Israel were to attack Iran, which they're threatening to do. Trump says if they're trying to work out a deal with Iran, where Iran would promise not to develop nuclear weapons, and the U.S. would drop sanctions. But the U.S. is pushing even further now and saying, well, we're not going to allow Iran to process uranium even for peaceful nuclear energy purposes. And Iran says that's unacceptable, that's our sovereign right. So Trump says, well, if these negotiations don't work out, we're going to go to war. And if that does happen, that'll certainly push Iran to make a decision to go ahead and get a nuclear weapon, which they do not have at this point in time. Of course, that all has happened in the context of this incredibly terrible and terrifying U.S.-backed Israeli genocide in Gaza. And I say U.S.-backed because this could not be happening at all without active U.S. participation. The U.S. has shipped something like 60 or 90,000 tons of bombs to Israel. Those bombs that are dropping on the heads of Palestinian children are made in the USA. And while the government continues to get political cover for the genocide in the United Nations, it's a very big concern. Of course, it's probably the major concern for the peace movement right now, is ending that genocide in Gaza. And it's a big concern for Veterans for Peace as well. But like pretty much all of us, people are kind of feeling powerless. What can we do? I mean, if the governments aren't standing up to stop this, how can I, as a retiree living a nice life at Rossmore, what can I do about it? So, well, Veterans for Peace has been struggling with that, and we just launched a new effort last week called the Veterans and Allies Fast for Gaza, and we have 7 of our members and friends fasting in front of the U.S. mission to the United Nations in New York City. And they're taking in 250 calories a day, and which is approximately the amount of calories that Palestinians are supposedly getting. As of a few weeks ago, they're probably getting less now. That's not very much. What's a normal calorie intake for a good diet? 1,800 or something like that. So this is a 40-day fast. People aren't going to fast to death or anything like that, but 40 days is pretty serious. But they put out the word when they launched this thing last week that they wanted people around the country to join them in wherever they live, and that people can design their own fast. They can do a Ramadan-style fast, which is like fasting from dawn to dusk, or they could decide they're going to fast one day a week, or they're going to skip lunch and talk to their neighbors about why. So given that flexibility, and given that a lot of people share this concern of like, what could I do? What am I supposed to do when I'm watching these children being starved to death? 600 people have signed up and are fasting now around the country, and some as far away as Australia have joined. So that's something you might want to check out on the Veterans for Peace website. We also have another important, and by the way, there's going to be an action at Travis Air Force Base this Saturday, May 31st. It's one in a series of actions by a coalition called the People's Arms Embargo, because Travis has been involved with shipping weapons to Israel, and is also providing planes for mass deportation. And now there's discussion, the Trump administration wants to have a migrant detention camp at Travis. So there's all kinds of good reasons to protest at Travis. There's a good family-friendly, no-arrest event happening this Saturday, starting at 10 a.m. And I just drove by there coming down from Clear Lake. So you're probably just about 30-minute drive from Travis, right? Yeah, so please consider joining that. You can go look up the People's Arms Embargo online and get more information. But it starts at 10 a.m. and it's going to be a lot of fun stuff going on, actually. They're pretty creative, this group. They've been practicing a particular dance they're going to be doing in the crosswalks. So another thing that's coming up soon that folks at Rossmore might want to be part of, Veterans for Peace has another national project. It's the Golden Rule sailboat, the historic Golden Rule anti-nuclear sailboat, which in 1958 was sailed by 4 Quaker peace activists attempting to stop U.S. nuclear weapons testing in the Marshall Islands. And they didn't get that far. They were stopped in Hawaii and arrested and thrown in jail. But they did bring international attention to the problem of all this radiation that was floating around the globe, getting in mother's milk, etc. And so this boat has quite a history. It was rediscovered floating around Humboldt Bay, a derelict wreck, in 2010. And people were actually going to make a bonfire out of it until they discovered its legacy. And the Veterans for Peace groups up in Humboldt Bay decided that they were going to rebuild the boat, or restore the boat, and restore its mission. So after 5 years of volunteer labor, it launched in 2015, June of 2015. We're coming up on our 10th anniversary of sailing for a nuclear-free world and a peaceful, sustainable future. We've sailed to Hawaii and back. We've sailed all up and down the west coast from British Columbia to Mexico. And last year, or it's almost 2 years ago now, we did the whole Great Loop around the east coast, down the Mississippi River, Gulf of Mexico, over to Cuba, even up the Atlantic coast, through the Hudson River, into the Lake Ontario and over to Toronto. And now that boat's back in its home port at Humboldt Bay. It's going to be sailing down to San Francisco Bay and spend about 3-4 weeks in SF Bay in August. It's going to be arriving on August 5th and be around until September 1st. We're going to have lots of different activities with all kinds of different groups, including just taking people out sailing for a day. And we're just starting to fill that calendar up. But it'd be great, for example, if some of you folks from Rossmore wanted to have a Rossmore Day on the Golden Rule. We could definitely arrange that, and that would be pretty cool. Last thing I'm going to say is I'll add this on. We have a Veterans for Peace also has our own newspaper now, Peace and Planet News. A lot of great articles in here, and from some of the best writers and analysts and activists. I have a bunch of these here, and they're free. So I'll put them on the table. And other than that, I just want to thank you for listening so patiently. And I hope that aside from a lot of the bleak picture that inevitably gets painted when you're talking about these matters of war and imperialism, that I also instilled a little bit of hope, and of course hope comes through action. And there are people in motion, and I'm sure some of you are, but you're encouraged to be in motion this week at Travis Air Force Base and to sail with the Golden Rule in August. And Rick and others here will have all the contact information for how to do that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Gerry. We want to have, we've got time for questions and answers from Gerry. I want to do that. Before we go to that, I want to encourage anybody who does not receive our email reminders. Well, how many people here receive the email reminders that we send out? Okay, so a lot. But there are some people who do not. And if you do not, please sign up. Rich and Carol are at the desk there. Also, the club is really out of money. And of course, renting the room and the equipment and so forth, it does cost some money. And we've raised funds. Of course, last month we raised funds with, I think there was $800 went with Paul Cox to Vietnam. And, but we need more people to become members. The dues are only $10 for the year. So if you like what we've been doing, please think about becoming a member, an official member. Of course, we welcome everybody to sign up to be on the email list, but we need some more members, and that $10 will help us. So now we only have one microphone because a second microphone costs another $50. so I'm going to, we'll take a couple of questions. I'll pass the mic out because we do need to hear the microphone. We do need to use the microphone rather, and then I'll pass the mic back to Gerry so he can answer it. So we'll take 2 questions.
My question's not about the speaker. My question's a little different. Is the Friends of Mount Diablo Peace and Justice, is that a Rossler club?
Yes. Yeah, the Peace Center, the Mount Diablo Peace and Justice Center has been around since 1969. And it began with draft counseling about the Vietnam War. And it's got a base at a church in Lafayette. And the official club here, which is a Rossmore club, is the Friends of the Peace Center. So, questions for Gerry?
Well, this isn't exactly a question, but I just want to say I am participating in the fast. I'll do my own modified version of it, and I welcome other people to join me. The news this week was pretty horrendous, so I honestly was feeling like I shouldn't eat anything. But and I'm also planning to go to the Travis event, which sounds like a safe thing to do. I haven't felt like I could do the other ones. So if somebody were interested in going, my name's Marianne Tubman, and I live on Reading Springs Road.
Wonderful, thanks Mariana. We'll send out on that email list with some coordination for people who want to carpool up with other people.
Plus you have your golden rule t-shirt on it, so you're checking all the boxes.
yeah, Mariana, why don't you stand up and
Yeah.
show your t-shirt there.
Yeah, I guess it was around 2017. There was a showing of, I think it was in San Mateo, of the Golden Rule documentary.
The film Making Waves.
Yeah.
I think it was Making the Waves. Anyway, it was really moving, and I think it was probably a San Mateo Peace Action event. And I was really impressed with the film. It was very moving.
I'm just curious to know, you mentioned that your family was very conservative, Catholic, your brothers were all police officers and stuff. How have relations with your family gone with all of your
Yeah, so it
activities?
was my father's brothers that were police officers. They're all passed now. But I have good relations with my siblings. My parents are passed, but my mom always supported me, even when she didn't understand what the heck I was doing. And at one point, years after all of this Vietnam stuff, she said to me, are you really working for the CIA? And the sad thing is, I think she would have preferred it if I said yes. But she always supported me, as moms tend to do.
Gerry, you've dedicated your whole life to peace and justice. Thank you for doing that.
You don't see me on the weekend.
I wanted to ask you about your organization. How big is it, and how many younger people are in it?
Those are both good questions, and I'd like to have better answers for both of them. Okay, so we're Veterans for Peace, 40 years old now. We're celebrating our 40th anniversary at our national convention in Las Vegas, July 25th to 27th. And we are not very big. We have only right now about 2,500 members. But we are everywhere. We have chapters in over 100 U.S. cities. And we also have several international chapters. So we're kind of woven into the fabric of the peace and justice movement. 90% of us, perhaps as many as 90% of us, are Vietnam era. So it's been a real challenge for us to recruit younger veterans. And there is another organization, About Face Veterans Against the War, that attracts a lot of the younger veterans. We do have younger veterans joining right now. Even several of the people who are in the FAST right now are as young as 23 years old and just got out of the Air Force. And we're recruiting more people. Several younger veterans have joined our board recently, and we're excited about that. But if we don't do an even better job of recruiting, then we're going to just die off. And we're losing a lot of members every year, just because they're passing on. So, but thanks for the question. Rick?
Yep.
Gerry, in the last few years, there's been a real shift in the American population becoming more aware of the atrocities going on in the Middle East. And I think a majority of Americans don't want to be bombing poor people in Gaza. But it doesn't seem to affect Washington. Is this shift going to go anywhere, or are they just going to just keep on killing?
Well, good question. That's why, I don't know if I did this blank, but...
Yeah, you do.
Well, that's why so many people are frustrated, because the polls bear out what you're saying. I mean, there's a large percentage of Americans that don't want the genocide in Gaza to continue and don't want their own government to support it. But there's a disconnect between the people and our political leadership. And even, as you see, the Democratic Party, which is, traditionally sometimes the anti-war party, has been 100% behind Joe Biden, who pursued this genocide and justified it, setting the stage for Trump to do the same. A lot of even our best, most progressive Democratic lawmakers get money from AIPAC, from the Israeli lobby, and that has a huge influence. So there's hardly anybody in Congress that's speaking out as well. So it's a real problem. Some people think we need a revolution, but that doesn't seem quite around the corner yet. But I don't know. I think we're going to see a lot of interesting developments over the next few years.
Do you think that what this big, beautiful bill and this huge amount of money going into defense, do you think that we might be on the edge of the breaking point of people really coming out against this?
One would hope so. I mean, yeah, one would hope so. I mean, I think a lot of you people who voted for Trump are starting to get buyer's remorse, because they see not only a big military buildup, but where's that money coming from? Direct attack on programs that serve the poor and working class families. So I think we might be moving towards a breaking point, because it's never been kind of bolder and more obvious what's going on. That virtually all the policies of the Trump administration are in the favor of billionaires, and they're stealing money from all of us taxpayers, really. Plus, repressing people, detaining them, deporting students, foreign students, just because they spoke against the genocide. So a direct assault on freedom of speech, increased repression. So yeah, I think we're probably moving towards a breaking point. How far can we bend? Let's hope that some really firm progressive leadership steps up and and lead the charge. But in the meantime, I have to depend on the students and the veterans. And give a shout out to Jewish Voice for Peace.
Yeah.
Actually, I have two questions, and I'll try and make them brief. But, you know, you mentioned the two-party system. How both parties are warmongers and suck up to big corporations, big money donors. So some people still believe the Democratic Party can be reformed. And you mentioned progressive Democrat, or progressives, which Barbara Lee just got elected as mayor of our Oakland, and she was the only one to vote against the Iraq War, as you know. So what do you think about that in terms of, or a new party, or, I mean, we really don't know what's going to happen, so you could just say that, and that'll be fine. So my second question is, you mentioned Nicaragua and the gender equality they're trying to attain. Whereas in the United States with Trump right now, and even with Biden, there was no attempt whatsoever to even acknowledge that there's been repression and suppression of women for time eternal, centuries. And there isn't really a lot of, in this particular older generation, there's a lot of sexism going on towards women. There's a lot of men who take charge and sort of write off whatever women, and women are different from men psychologically, not just physically. But what do you think about that in terms of Nicaragua's progress and the lack of it in the United States?
Yeah, well, as far as first question, thanks, you gave me the out there. I don't really know what the answer is there. I mean, I personally don't see a lot of hope in the Democratic Party. I think the efforts to reform it will probably be stymied by AIPAC and by a lot of corporate money. But maybe I'll be wrong. I'd be happy to be wrong. Perhaps things coming to a head the way they are could have some kind of sea change in the Democratic Party. The efforts to build a third independent party are very, very weak and not very promising. So we're kind of stuck without any really great choices at this point in time. But I think, you know, grassroots activism is where I go, and I think that's what we have until something better comes along. As far as the gender equality, well, you said it. It's pretty remarkable, though. As I said, you wouldn't expect it in Nicaragua, or maybe I'm actually projecting some stereotypes about you know, Latin America is known for their machismo and their macho cultures, and of course, along with the rest of the world. So you'd think that the Western world, which claims to be more progressive and more open to gender equality, you think, but we couldn't pass the Equal Rights Amendment, could we? And I'm a little confused about that, because Biden, at the end of his administration, claims that the Equal Rights Amendment is now law because another state had ratified it. But by that time, supposedly the calendar had gone too far, and I don't think it really is true. But yeah, so why can a poor developing country, for all its progress, Nicaragua is still like the second poorest country in the hemisphere, I think. And yet, if there's political will at the top and people pushing from the bottom, things can happen. And in this case, we have maybe a lot of political will at the bottom, but not at the top.
One last question.
For a second, I was afraid you were going to give that to Roger.
So I have a question about the military budget, because it seems like with this budget reconciliation and so on, the military budget rarely comes up. I mean, it seems to be sacrosanct, even though it's a huge increase in the military budget. So I don't know how to, it seems like we need to somehow try to change some of the focus. I mean, there's so many bad things in that, but.
Well, that would have been a good place for Doge to go, to the Pentagon. Yeah. So that would have been a good place for Doge to go, to the Pentagon, but they're doing just the opposite. In fact, Trump said just the other day, I think maybe when he was speaking to the West Point cadets, he said, we're not going to take a dime away from the Pentagon budget. And in fact, they're going to increase it substantially to, the Republicans have a bill to increase it to $1 trillion, I think. So,
almost. Yeah.
So it's
almost there.
a lot of that is just waste and fraud, of course.
Sure.
How much do we need for true defense? We have a military policy that seeks full spectrum dominance in every part of the world. And we have like 800 U.S. military bases all around the world. Shut those down and you could save a whole big bundle of money. So thanks for asking. We have to keep pushing, because that's exactly what we should be calling for, is the reduction in the military budget, full funding of veterans benefits and all the social programs. And I mean, they even want to, they're even going to take a bite out of Medicare now. So I think a lot of people with gray hair are going to be up in arms.
Well, with that, I think we'll wrap it up for today. People, if they want to ask, talk with Gerry personally, they can do so right now. We'll be staying here for some time, but want to thank everybody for coming today. Hope you enjoyed it as I did. I knew a bit. Gerry genuinely is a peace hero of the United States, and thank you very much, Gerry.